good afternoon, evening, wherever you are. There's a lot of new people here today, a lot of friendly faces that I recognize seeing from other PDs. So welcome and thanking you all for taking an hour and a half of your time to spend with us and to learn a little bit more about social emotional learning today. If you've been here at the Dive4Ag PD sessions before, you know me, I'm Susan Rowe. I'm the director of the Dive4Ag project. And I have the pleasure to work with an amazing team of people at Precollege programs and 4-H extension. So I'll kick us off. And I know for some of you, this will be a little bit repetitive. I just wanted to give it a quick 5-minute introduction to Dive4Ag to those of you who are hearing about it for the first time. And then we'll go on and give us some proper introductions to our presenters right after that. Okay, is this gonna move? Yeah, all right. So Dive for Agriculture is what we created to say distance immersive virtual education. And it is a project funded by the USDA in partnerships with a lot of partners, but the core partners is the OSU Precollege programs, the unit that I come from and work as a director, and 4-H extension at OSU, where Bob, one of our presenters, is located, and many of other partners in the Dive4Ag project. That project, it was a rapid response to COVID and is intended for middle and high school students and educators. And we're creating virtual immersive reality experiences for you as educators to be able to walk your youth through it, whether we're in the Oculus and VR sets that we're gonna have, or through the apps that are being created. So there'll be multiple ways to experience this Dive4Ag experiences, and we're gonna learn more about each one of them in further PDs and other PDs after this one. I forgot to advance while I was talking. I'm sorry about that. Should have prompted me. I was waiting for your cue, Yasmeen.
Oh, sorry.
And I was like, hey, this is my part. I got to advance. So we are serving Oregon and Washington youth and educators and creating this really state-of-the-art innovative apps that we're going to get to pilot as a group and experience to explore agriculture through virtual reality. And these activities will be paired with a lot of other things that we've been doing in the last year, and that will be launching it in the next year. There are some egg science cafes that are happening for youth participating in this program, which will be invited to bring some of the youth of your groups to come in and participate. There are the virtual reality experiences. There's the teens as teachers, PD. So there is a variety of things that are happening within the Dive4Ag project beyond the professional development. So somebody will put the Dive4Ag website on the chat, so you can take a time later to go in and look at all the other PD sessions and everything else that you can get involved with. I will say quickly, some of you here today are Dive4Ag educators. Thank you, thank you, thank you. It means that you are committed to come to every PD session and to bring a group of youth to one of our activities, and we're finishing set it up to pay you a stipend to be able to do this commitment. If you're new here today and you are welcome to be here. These are open to anyone that want to come and join us. But if you wanted to become a Dive4Ag educator and receive a stipend and learn more about the commitment for it, please email me or look at the website. All of the information is in there. You're welcome to. With no further ado, because we have a lot of really cool things to learn with Bob and Yasmeen today, I will give them the floor. I will introduce myself again, Susan Rowe, Precollege programs at Oregon State University. You hear my accent. I'm originally from Brazil. I grew up in Brazil, but came to this country about 10 years ago. So I'm first-year generation Latina, woman in science, all the first that you can think about. Social and emotional learning is a very passionate topic for me, and I think very needed in the world of today as we think about creating more programs that are impactful for educators and youth. And that's our Dive4Ag effort to do that as well. And with that, I invited Barb and Yasmeen to introduce themselves as our experts today.
Great. Thank you so much, Susan. And I just saw, oh yeah, thank you, Barb. Barb just put Susan's email in the chat for anyone who would like to email Susan. So my name is Yasmeen Hossain. I work also at OSU, the Oregon State University, in the Extension Service. And the program I work for is the Oregon Natural Resources Education Program. We provide professional development for pre-K to 12 educators all over Oregon. And I'll hand it off to Barb.
Hi, everybody. I'm Barb Brody, and I work for Oregon State University as well, and I am an extension faculty. I am based currently since I've been with Oregon State in Malheur County, and I have a 4-H family and community health and supplemental nutrition education program split, and excited to be here.
Thank you so much, Barb. And we would love to know all of you a little bit. So if you would like to type in the chat, if the chat is available to you, your name, your pronouns, if you're comfortable sharing them, and where you are currently. So I'll just give you a couple of moments to introduce yourself in the chat. And I invite everyone to wander over to the chat and read everybody's introductions. So thank you, Melinda, Sarah, Kat, Jessica.
Oh, we have some from Nissa. Nice.
Corvallis, I'm in Albany. And as you type your introduction in the chat, I would just like to start our time together by acknowledging that we're all here as whole humans, as our whole selves, with whatever is going on in our professional life, in our personal life, kids, pets, in our house. So I just want to invite you to participate in this workshop in whatever capacity is available to you, and take care of your needs. If you need to step away, but it's not break time, please do so. All right, thank you for introducing yourself. Susan, if you could please advance to the next slide. Thank you. So since this is an online session and we're each located in many different areas, as you can see in the chat, I'd like to acknowledge that all education takes place on Indigenous homelands, and we honor with gratitude the land itself and the people who have stewarded it throughout the generations and still are stewards today and taking care of the land. Doing a land acknowledgement, either a short one like this or a much longer one, is one of the ways that I choose to engage with decolonizing my own worldview, my thoughts, and my interactions with others. And I recognize that this is only one very small step, one way that I can show respect for Indigenous peoples and recognize their past, present, and continuing relationship to the land that we are on. Next slide, please. So for our time together, just a really quick agenda overview. We'll do a quick opening and then a more in-depth introduction to SEL, social emotional learning, and what kind of a framework might we use for an educational setting. We will have a break about halfway through, and then have a good session and section on how do you apply SEL, again, in that educational setting, talk a little bit about next steps, and then have a closing. Next slide.
Oh, wait, just one second, Yasmeen. Let's check with everybody. We heard from one person that they're not seeing the slides. Can everybody? So some can see the slides.
I can't. This is Melinda.
Is there anyone other than Melinda who cannot see?
Everybody else can see them. I wonder if you need to log out and log back in, Melinda.
Okay, I'll do that.
Okay, thank you. And then if you joined us, some of you have come in just recently. If you'll put in the chat where you're from, your county, your name and your county, that would be great. Thanks, everybody. At any time, put in the chat if you're having problems. A couple of people had connection problems.
All right, next slide, please. So for our opening, I would like to invite you to think about and add in the chat or unmute and share if the chat is not available to you. If you were a farm animal today, which animal would you be and why? So asking people to engage with this kind of question really helps practicing that skill of self-awareness and tapping into how you're feeling and becoming curious about the why. So it's kind of practicing those emotional skills and emotional identification. So thank you. I see that some people already started adding in the chat. A barn cat, a goat, because I like to eat everything. So for me today, I feel a bit like a rooster because I'm, here at this workshop and have a lot with you to share. So I feel like I'm crowing a little bit today. In a good way, I hope. I'll just give a few moments and give you some time to reflect and add in the chat. Susan is a cat, Jessica, livestock. Cherie is it's moving so fast. A bee, free range chicken, herding dog, ox, sheep, goat. I love it. So this is kind of this SEL prompt invitation that you might do with your learners, with your students. And you could even roll this out into a bigger discussion of what is considered a farm animal. How do you know if it's a working animal? Is it a pet? Like how do you define farm animal? Okay, so as you, if you haven't had a chance to do a little bit of self-reflection yet and are still, typing your animal in the chat, please continue to do so. We do have a little poll for our opening, which is a little mini quiz testing your knowledge about SEL. So maybe I'll go ahead and launch that. So for those of you who already put your animal in the chat, you're welcome to take the poll. And just give you a few moments so that all of you will have a chance to answer these questions. Your best guess. If you don't know the answer, that's completely fine. Okay, I think almost everyone has completed the poll. 4 more people, I think 3 or 4 people have not answered yet. So I'll just give you one more moment to complete this small SEL quiz.
I think, does that count us, Yasmeen? And so I think that's it because it's counting us.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you everyone who responded. So I will end the poll and share the results. And yep. So for the first question, it looks like 13 of you said ancient Greece. For the second question, the majority said it's false. And the third question, the majority said it's true. Okay. Let's find out the answers. Susan, if you could advance to the next slide, please. And so the first question, what was the first time a scholar wrote about SEL? For those of you who chose ancient Greece, you are completely accurate. Plato wrote about it in the Republic. He talked about having a holistic curriculum in education and how that helps produce citizens of good character. Next slide, please. The second question, students primarily learn SEL skills in school. If you could click one more time. That is false. So I think everyone, or most of you got that right. Students develop their SEL skills throughout their entire day, whether they're at school, at home, playing with friends, eating dinner with their family, out in their community. Next slide, please. SEL skills are developed from birth to adulthood. If you could click one more time, that is false because it doesn't end when we get to adulthood. It continues all the way from birth to death. We're never done practicing our SEL skills and developing that social emotional component to who we are. All right, next slide, please. So what is SEL? I keep talking about SEL. Some of you might already be familiar with it, so I won't spend too much time on this, but essentially the important parts are to remember all learning is social and emotional. We cannot separate our like rational brain from the social emotional parts of us, and cannot separate how our brain digests information from our emotions and our social skills. So all learners, all students possess social emotional skills. We all do. Again, it starts at birth. It's fostered throughout lifetime. So it's less about learning, SEL learning, and it's more about developing these skills. So I think personally, social emotional development would be a more accurate term to use, but I'm not making an argument to like start a movement to change SEL to SED. But, you know, developing these skills, as some of you might know firsthand with your students or maybe with your kids or yourself, is very complex, dynamic, and it's this ongoing process lasting a lifetime. As we already kind of identified, it doesn't just end when you graduate high school. You're not done. We're never done. One interesting thing is there's no universal definition of SEL. As you know, the first time it was written about was in ancient Greece, and there's no like right way to define it. It's a little bit vague and nebulous, and depending on what angle you're coming from. And so going with that, today there are over 100 different SEL related frameworks. The one that you might be most familiar with here in the US in the educational field is CASEL, and I'll go over that one next. One more click, please, Susan. So a good general description of SEL is that it is a process through which we learn to recognize and manage emotions, care about others, make good decisions, behave ethically and responsibly, and develop positive relationships and avoid negative behaviors. Next slide, please. So what does SEL specifically look like in an educational setting? So I had mentioned CASEL, which is the Collaborative for Academic, Social, and Emotional Learning. And I will go over their framework next, again, mainly because it's the most widely used in the US education system. Oh, Barb, actually, if you could please post a link to CASEL in the chat. Thank you. Oh, you already did. I'm behind. All right. So in education, SEL aims to foster students' skills to be responsible, productive, caring, and engaged members of society. In the 1980s, research conducted in the Yale School of Medicine showed the correlation between a student's social emotional skills and their academic performance, and it was a positive correlation. And so that really started the kind of trend and popularizing it in schools, in class. Now, another thing to remember, I could have put this in the quiz, but I didn't, is that it just doesn't only apply to youth, your students. It also applies to you, the educators, really to everybody. So in an ideal world, we're all constantly, consciously fostering our SEL skills. Next slide, please. So I'd like to ask for one of you, a volunteer, to unmute yourself and read this quote for us.
Oh, this is Melinda. Educating the mind without educating the heart is no education at all. Aristotle.
Thank you so much, Melinda. Something to keep in mind. Okay, next slide, please. So I'm curious what you think. Why do you think SEL is important? Why should we care about this? So I just want to give you a few moments to add your thoughts to the chat if you would like, or you can just do a little bit of silent reflection. Why do you think it's important? Could be something you already know about SEL, could be something that you're guessing, that you're intuiting. Thank you, Jessica. Fostering a culture of people who are aware of their own emotions. Yeah, absolutely. Future leaders need to be taught holistically. It can be healing, helps to gauge how we feel in certain situations, centers the student. Oh yeah, definitely. Thank you, Betsy. just give you one more moment in case you're typing in a chat and haven't finished your sentence yet. Thank you, Ryan. Yeah. Social emotional skills are foundational to life, affects our capacity to learn and connect with others, directly influences my quality of life and study work outcomes. We learn in groups, absolutely. Thank you so much for your thoughts on this. Susan, if you could please click one more time. So research has shown that, again, this is students and educators, all of us, SEL, practicing these SEL skills in an educational setting has really improved test scores, grades, attendance, decreased emotional distress, helped foster a more positive relationship with peers and with adults. Again, that's stress management, increased the level of confidence and sense of purpose. Students have an increased mental well-being. They engage more in pro-social behavior, reduced risk-taking behavior, more attentive and focused. And these are, of course, generalizations and from research. So, of course, it wouldn't apply to every single student, but the majority. Helps students practice effective self-management. And very important, it improves the well-being of educators as well. So research has shown that educators who foster their SEL skills consciously have an improved relationship with students and their colleagues and a better attitude towards work and job satisfaction. So if that's not an argument, I don't know what is. Next slide, please. Okay, so I keep talking about the SEL 5 core competencies, the CASEL framework. So you may have, again, heard of CASEL before. You may have seen this wheel before. We have adapted the wheel slightly in the very center, the white circle. You see that we put equity and cultural competence in the center because it needs to be front and center and embedded throughout SEL. And I will talk about that a little bit more in a couple of slides. So CASEL recently updated their framework to reflect that SEL development doesn't start and stop in the classroom. So you can see the blue circles going out. They kind of changed this a little bit to show that SEL encompasses the school administration, families and caregivers, and then really the entire community where students live, influencing their social emotional development. So let's go through these 5 competencies. Next slide, please. First one, self-awareness. It's orange, so it's about the self. Can be described as the ability to understand one's own emotions, thoughts, and values, and how they influence behavior across contexts. So some of the kind of strategies here are identifying one's emotions, demonstrating honesty and integrity, linking feelings, values, and thoughts, examining prejudice and biases, and identifying personal, cultural, and linguistic assets, and having that growth mindset. Next, if you could click one more time, please. So in an educational setting, how might you implement this? So one thing could be doing emotional check-ins like the weather report or the farm animal, using scientific observation practice and STEAM. I wonder reminds me of tune into personal needs for field trips or outdoor activities. So letting students kind of figure out, well, we're going outside, there's some snow, what might you need? That's the like, am I cold? Am I hot? What do I need? Next slide, please. So the next one is self-management, still orange. So it's still about the self. So now that you've identified your emotions or your needs, can you do about it? So this is about managing emotions, thoughts, and behaviors effectively in different situations to achieve certain goals or aspirations. So I'm feeling really hungry and grumpy. I don't want to feel this way. I want to feel, that I'm able to participate. What do I need to do to get from here to here? So one of the strategies is stress management tools, of course, exhibiting self-discipline and self-motivation, setting those goals personally and collectively, showing the courage to take initiative, demonstrating personal and collective agency. And Susan, if you could click, please. So some strategies and tools for the learning environment, the classroom, is to incorporate mindfulness activities, or any kind of like conscious breathing activities. And you might do nature-based breathing activities such as the bee breath, if you're talking about bees later on. And then allowing the students to have lots of brain and screen breaks. so that they can take care of their needs, they can manage themselves. Next slide, please. So the next one is social awareness. Now we're in the blue field, which is about others, relating to others. And this is the ability to understand the perspectives of and empathize with others, including those from diverse backgrounds, cultures, and contexts. So this is about putting yourself in someone else's shoes, recognizing the strengths of others, demonstrating empathy and compassion, gratitude, very important, and identifying the diverse social norms, including unjust ones. And one more click, please. So again, some classroom strategies, doing a land acknowledgement, that's that social awareness, like I did at the beginning of this PD, or this workshop, sorry, professional development, so I shortened that to PD. Then having the educator model the SEL competencies themselves. So that might be the educator coming in one morning and saying, hi everyone, I'm feeling really sad this morning because my cat is sick or something like that. So it's modeling that, identifying emotions. And then the educator might say what they're going to do about it. You know, I'm going to have a piece of chocolate. I'm going to just take it easy today. And then, you know, having some cultural and historic learning. So the place, agriculture practices, farm animals, putting everything in the social context. And some activities that are related to natural resources might be the web of life, doing some kind of restoration work, or a local place-based project, and lots of gratitude practice. Next slide, please. Relationship skills, another blue category, which is about others. So this is the ability to establish and maintain healthy and supportive relationships to effectively navigate settings with diverse individuals and groups. It's about communication, cultural competency, teamwork, collaborative problem solving, resolving conflicts constructively, maybe some restorative justice if it's appropriate, showing leadership, seeking and offering support and help. Sometimes the hardest thing to do is to ask for help. And then standing up for the rights of others. One more click, please. So again, what might this look like in a learning setting? Essentially all group work, they get to practice their relationship skills, discussing social justice issues, current events, and then setting up the ground rules for group discussions or group work, and having that be a collaborative process where the students get to decide how do they want to be talked to by their peers, which they also have to abide by, of course. Next slide, please. So the very last one is about the action. So what, you know, let's take action, which is the responsible decision making. And this one is about making caring and constructive choices about personal behavior and social interactions. So reflecting on one's role to promote well-being, evaluating personal, interpersonal, community, and institutional impacts, identifying solutions to problems, and learning to make reasoned judgment after analyzing information, data, and facts. And that, one more click, please. Thank you. So what you might want to or can build into the learning environment is opportunities for self-paced learning where students get to decide how and when can they learn best. Give choices for engagement or modification. So something like you can either write an essay about this or make an art piece, you know, demonstrating your knowledge about this. Civic engagement projects, and then activities with a broad impact that again takes into account diverse situations such as a trash cleanup, a school energy audit, any kind of advocacy projects. Next slide, please. So as I mentioned earlier, equity, cultural competence, and that kind of trauma-informed approach is, you know, mainly being aware that trauma is pervasive. Trauma is invisible. It's not like a broken arm. Oftentimes we cannot see it. So just treating everyone with a trauma-informed approach. So the main reason why this is so important for to take into account with SEL is because one size does not fit all. Students have varied backgrounds, cultures, needs, experiences, and as such, they might respond very differently to an SEL strategy. The competencies can be expressed similarly across developmental stages, but very differently by culture. And culture might not only relate to being from a different ethnicity, but every family has their very own unique family culture based on their ancestors, based on how they do things in their family, the land that they're on or from. So everyone has their own unique culture. For SEL to be successfully developed, it's really important that all students feel included, respected, represented, affirmed, and valued. So it's about meeting the student where they're at, not asking students to meet the educator or meet all the rest of everyone else where they are. So it's, if a student has individual needs, a unique background, meet them where they're at. So if an educator implements SEL without taking into account the student's cultural, racial, ethnic, linguistic trauma, or any kind of socio-demographic, socio-demographic and economic backgrounds, it could lead to students feeling alienated in their classrooms and not included, which is kind of the opposite of what the SEL skills want to foster. So definitely, I know for everybody, the goal is not to do harm. The goal is to implement SEL to do good, to support the students and foster their skills. One more click. Oh, next slide, please. So I know there's a lot of words on this slide and it's very small. I do want to share with you that we will be sending all of you the slides after this workshop, or in the next couple of days as a follow-up. But the main things I wanted to highlight in this slide, which is how do you bring it to a classroom? And this could be, for formal educators, the formal classroom, but it could also be if you work with any kind of students, even in an informal setting, that you might be able to implement some of these ways. And these are just some ideas. There are many ways to kind of center equity in SEL efforts. So the first one is, if you have the ability to learn about the families from your students, that can really be helpful to give you information that you need, again, about what is the student's unique culture, and use that to build up the student's competencies. When possible, and again, I recognize this is not always possible, but engaging families in SEL, telling them why it's important, what some tools might be they could do with their kids at home, because SEL doesn't start and stop in the classroom, right? It continues when the student leaves and before the student comes. Then affirming diverse backgrounds and traditions in the class, and this might be through students sharing their stories, their foods, their culture, and then practicing empathy, putting yourself in their shoes, and so on. Using discipline practices that are inclusive and not exclusionary. So saying, oh, you were disruptive and therefore you cannot take part in this activity is kind of contradictory to fostering that relationship building skills and the inclusion and the equity. So that's again where kind of restorative justice, some of the principles there would come into play. And then lastly, focusing on the educators' social emotional needs and assets as well. I know I've mentioned this a couple of times already. So it's not just, I have this little, my own little rant about this. Oftentimes we think, oh, that just means self-care and I need to take care of myself. But I know that educators often can get really burnt out. And we can all actually reach a level of burnout where we're no longer able to access self-care. And then just saying, oh, but your stress management, you're not doing it right, can be even more damaging. So I like to talk about community care, because it's all of our responsibility to support each other, through social emotional skills and development. And it's not only up to us through self-care to manage our stress. I think we're all in it together, and especially our educators who are holding so much space for the students, the next generations, really need the community care. So if you think about the Castle framework, it's the circles, right? Educators get the community circle as well. Okay, so I know this is a really big topic and we're only diving into it very briefly today, but I did want to leave you with a couple more resources for you to continue your learning in SEL, especially this equity piece that can, it can unfold for hours and hours and hours. So Barb, if you could please put the link to the resource document in the chat. And I invite you to click on it now, and we can send you the link after this workshop as well, so that you can have it. But there's a couple of articles, a couple of resources in this resource list, and I encourage you to go and visit it and peruse it when you have time. Okay, next slide, please. So Barb will talk a little bit about the impacts of the pandemic.
Yasmeen, Barb, can I ask a question before we jump into Barb quick? And I'm not sure if we set that up, or if folks have questions, please put it on the chat or raise your hand. One of us will see you raising your hands to talk about anything that you want to talk about as you listen. So my quick kind of thinking, I wanted to hear you and Barb talk about more, Yasmeen, is, you talked about the first time that social emotional learning even came about in ancient Greek. Was it called social emotional learning or called something else? I'm just sitting here and wondering how many of the educators in this room, I recognize that we do this. It's not like we've never done this before. We do this in this way, we do that in that way. But what has been more helpful in your experience teaching about social emotional learning and not getting caught up into this big hip of social emotional learning now, but really think about, this is something we can do and we can do now. And you don't need to have a degree for it. We don't need to have a PhD in psychology and counseling for it, but really think concretely about, is this something that I can do, and not just something that became, especially after COVID, very popular, if you know what I mean.
Yes, and sorry, Susan, I'm not sure, did you have a specific question, or
like what are your best views and experience of looking this into practice in concrete things where folks are recognizing this is something that I do not need a PhD degree for. This is something that I can do on a daily basis. And these are specific, concrete kind of things that I already implemented in my class, and just a couple of other examples that take us. I'm just struggling. I'm going to say that way, maybe it's helpful, as I'm just putting my thinking together. It's not quite articulated, but I have heard comments by colleagues and other educators before this. It was like, well, I don't want to do any social emotional learning, professional development. I don't like it. It doesn't sound good to me. There's just this kind of wave of things that people are talking about that I think is just too out there. I'm just trying. Did you ever run into this with your experience teaching about social emotional learning and helping educators implement it in both formal and informal settings? Is there a resistance to it that you ever encountered?
Yes, absolutely. And for educators who are already, overworked and don't have enough time as it is, thinking about taking on this whole new subject and this whole new way of doing things. Absolutely. I've heard that a lot. And thank you for clarifying, Susan. And I would absolutely want to add on that incorporating SEL in education doesn't mean you have to throw out your old lesson plans and write a whole new lesson plan and do it this whole new way. It's really about just embedding small tools and strategies here and there throughout the time you have with your learners, whether it's a whole day or just 45 minutes, whatever it could be. And in the application section, so after the break, we'll have a chance to look at exactly how to embed just small little strategies here and there into an existing lesson plan.
Can I throw something in, Yasmeen?
Yeah.
You mentioned, Susan, you don't need a PhD, but I happen to have a PhD in leadership, and we did learn about emotional intelligence. And it is about being socially aware. If we're aware of ourselves and we can be balanced, then we're able to acknowledge others. So by us taking that time to learn about how we're feeling and acknowledge that, we're able to serve better to serve others better. And I think in my mind, as having a PhD and working with kiddos of 20 plus years in youth development, I put this to psychological capital. We have 4 H's: head, heart, hands, and health. And they align with head, heart, hands, and health. When you can put it in that capacity, it breaks it down, and you're already doing that. And as far as resistance, people are going to be resistant to change because they are afraid of change. When there's change, there's uncertainty. When there's uncertainty, there's risk. but you never know until you try. So you have to keep pushing the envelope to let others know that you are in tune with yourself to set that platform, because you're cognizant of the fact that, you know what, I want to better meet the needs of my kids or the population that I'm serving because I'm emotionally in tune and I can better support them if I do this. So when you're open to that, it opens up opportunities along the way. So you're gonna find resistance in anything that we do. But if you approach it in a manner that allows it to be conducive to learning and put it in a platform that everyone can learn from this, well, then you have to start somewhere. I think when you approach it that way, you have to keep pushing the envelope. You know, people are afraid of change. They talk the same thing about diversity, equity, inclusion. They're afraid of it, but you can talk about it all you want. Until you do something about it, it's never going to change. So you have to start somewhere. And that's my take on it. So.
Yeah, thank you so much, Melinda. And I see some people added some suggestions in the chat as well. And I wonder, in the interest of time, if we might move on, and then we can always revisit this. And maybe perhaps Barb, Susan and I can stay on this Zoom a little bit longer at the end. And if you have any more questions, feel free to stay longer and we can chat about it.
Thanks, Yasmeen. Thank you, everybody, for contributing and sharing your thoughts. It really does help us as learners and as a group. So we also are focusing more on a classroom setting tonight, but we do acknowledge that there are formal and informal educators on this training tonight. And we come from a different perspective. I shared, and one of the things that we talked about when we were putting this together is I need to be really cognizant and on when I go into the classroom, because when you're non-formal or you don't know the kids in a non-formal setting like teachers do, you don't know all the things that they're bringing into the classroom. You don't have access to all that. So for me, this is an ongoing work that's important. So we're going to look at some of the impacts the pandemic, before, how we were doing social emotional learning, resilience, all of that, and what the pandemic has done. And Susan has a slide up there, but some of the contributing factors, and I'm going to put another hat on. We talk about school closures and what that did to educators, but also office closures, after school program closures, church closures, all of those closures, community closures, really were some of the contributing factors. Along with that was a lack of resources. Even my office, I can't get internet at my office because we don't have access. So in rural areas, it was a big thing. Or for people who are facing challenges, with income, it added another factor. Adapting to remote learning, not only for the learner, but for the educator and the family, and us even as community partners and being the other caring adult, the teacher, the parent role. So some of you were educators and some of you were parent teachers at home as well. A big one for me was the physical and social distancing, and it still impacts me. I don't do my best working and the isolation piece. So limited or no social interaction with peers, caring adults, and community groups. The economic impact is huge. The loss of jobs, people staying home. Current research does show that more people are quitting their jobs due to the pandemic and finding different lines of work. The housing and food insecurity, or even getting to food, access to food with our transportation, as little as we have for our seniors, really cut down. It stopped. Addiction, domestic and sexual and child violence to a child are other factors. Can anybody else think of any other factors that they've seen as educators that are contributing to this impact on social emotional learning? Okay. So we talk about resilience and what makes a person resilient, but resilience, just like social emotional learning, doesn't end. And so resilience can help us get through and overcome hardships. Resilience is not something we're born with. It's built over time as each of us has different life experiences that we encounter. Everyone is unique in how we counterbalance related to resilience. But the one thing that research shows, most children who develop resilience that they have in common is a stable, committed relationship with a supportive parent, family member, caregiver, teacher, or community member. And so the effects of the pandemic are daunting because that access was cut off. Somebody said earlier about having, an adult or being an educator. And so this also impacts us. So going to work, having that supportive, caring adult. I miss my colleagues immensely not being there. But these are some of the contributing factors that really impact it. And so that community factors and support, the social demographic characteristics of a family, a community. Malheur County has the highest poverty in the state. So we faced some really challenging times and continue to face challenging times. The socioeconomic characteristics, the family culture that Yasmeen talked a little bit about, and that stability. And so what other resilience factors, pre-pandemic or during? I have a student that's actually in Mr. Dickey's class, and that's how I met her, was through Smile. And she said when this first happened, she was failing math and she had never failed math before. And she did not know. I said, what's going on? And she said, well, I wouldn't ask questions in the classroom. I would go after school and get help because in my culture, you don't speak up like that. And she said, now that we're virtual, I don't know how to do that. And so teaching her how to do that and having a conversation and walking her through it is, she now has that skill to be more resilient.
You talked about that, Barbara. I know I just read Maureen's chat too. I was going to say the social media, it's a catch-22. Parents here get on there, that kind of that commercial of, can't get off your tablet. And then the kid's like, or else, what are you going to do, mom? Get off your tablet. It's like you're threatening them, but what are you going to do? Because they're just saying, go to social media and get away from me, but they're not even interacting. So that in and of itself is causing the problem for kids lacking social emotional learning because there's no interaction. There's no relationships with their family. I mean, I grew up, I'm 50. We had dinner at the, as a family. And I don't think we have that nowadays. I mean, those that have a stability, and I'm going to resort to faith-based family foundation, that they have that. For those that don't, it's a catch-22. Here's the social media, but again, like Maureen mentioned, here comes the bullying. But then what do parents do? Kids emulate what their parents do, so they're only emulating what they see, and it's unfortunate. And we're quick to play the blame game, but in reality, parents are to blame, because they're not providing that attention that the kids need, because it's all about here, go keep busy with your iPad, with your phone, but they get after them. It's kind of like a double-edged sword. Do this, but don't do that. So kids don't know how to deal with it. They don't know how to be resilient. And those that are, it's because they planted a seed, their parents, when they were little. They're leading by example. And that's my take on that.
Yeah, thank you for sharing, you guys. So, and sharing in the chat as well. Susan, can you switch slides? Sorry. Oh, go back. Go back. So that was the one that we just covered, was the resilience one. And Roots of Resilience, the link down at the bottom does have some extra resources for educators. Next slide, Susan. Thank you. So impacts, again, we're talking about what was reduced, and Maureen put in the chat the daily exposure to bullying, racism, some of those things. But what was reduced was that student engagement that's so important, and that help after with students and student engagement in community events. The social interaction and opportunities for that pro-social engagement. They're seeing students that have been out of school for 2 years are really struggling, not even knowing how to turn in an assignment or that it's important to turn it in on time. The drop-in school-based supports and the ongoing supports that happen at a school were reduced and continue to be reduced. The regular therapies for students with disabilities really faced a lot. And then that daily exposure to bullying, we did identify in this group that it's now become through social media. And then that sense of belonging in their school or learning environment or community environment. Next slide, Susan. So those are some of the impacts. And before we go to break, we're going to switch to the next, to some other absentees, some of the other things that happen. But one of the other things, there's an increased in absenteeism during remote learning, falling behind, fear and anxiety, depression and feeling of hopelessness. We know suicide rates have gone way up. An increase in mental health challenges, the disparities, students who have, we're really seeing students who have supports at home and those students that really depend on these community supports, the gap widening, and then the skills in time management and self-direction. So really getting involved again where that caring adult can really make a difference. And so that's a little depressing, but we're going to move forward and show, and then after break, how you can apply some of the social emotional learning in the ag world and in these lessons that we're doing. So we're going to take about a 5-minute break. Yasmeen, are we good on time?
Yeah, how about we do a 4-minute break?
Okay. 4-minute break, and then we'll come back to applying strategies to those tools in lesson planning. So we'll be back at 6:20, or I'm on Mountain Time, 5:29, 6:29 for us on Mountain Time.
All right, so welcome back, everyone. Let's continue. So Susan, if you could switch to the next slide, please. So as promised, we will be looking a little bit about how do you apply SEL strategies to a lesson plan. But before we do that, we'll talk a little bit about agriculture education and SEL. Next slide, please. And Barb will be sharing some of her wisdom with you and her experience.
So those of you who are new today, Dive for Ag will have the virtual reality experiences on different ag industries from across Oregon. So I think it's important to understand that importance of ag education and think to yourself, what do you think when we say why ag education? It'd be a great topic to talk about. But one really important thing that you may not know is Oregon State University is the land-grant University of Oregon. And the original mission of those universities was set in 1862. And that's why we have extension in every county. So if you don't know, there is extension offices in every county that are the research arm of the university. And it's originally was to teach agriculture, military tactics, and mechanics to members of the community. So really important. And then these are some quotes that National Ag Association of Educators of Ag Education. And I do have my teaching credential in ag. And so that's a big part. So a lot of you, when we think about ag education, think about FFA. But many of you may have school gardens. Delane Easton in California put forth a school garden in every school, was one of her charges. She was the superintendent. And ag education, there's different reasons to have it in your schools and the importance of it. And then there are opportunities, if you're not aware of that, besides this Dive for Ag, that extension office in every community can help you with that. And then Ag in the Classroom is another great resource for you to dive a little bit more into that. Next slide, please. But as Yasmeen shared earlier, and as she's going to dig in right now, ag education really connects the learner. And like on-rep, what Yasmeen does, those of you who are on-rep educators, there's a lot in that piece that could be related to ag, but it connects the learner to that natural world. And then you'll see in here some of the research of different aspects of social emotional learning and how having this education, nature, agriculture, our earth, where we come from, it increases the social connectivity and decreases peer conflict. it forms an emotional connection of nature and elements. So this is more of the nature piece, but also when they're going through these immersive lessons on virtual reality, we want you to be aware of that, these social emotional pieces. It fosters a meaningful relationship with the real world. And then the sensory connection. And so that mindfulness, the self-management, the mental and emotional well-being. So those are really important, but also that connectedness with our world is what they're finding a lot of kids are missing in the social emotional learning piece. And so as we dive into the Dive for Ag education pieces, we really want you to make these connections and keep them in mind. So to move forward, Yasmeen's going to lead us through how you put that into a lesson plan. Your turn, where you're up.
Thank you. Next slide, please. So we wanted to first just give a really brief mini demonstration of how we would implement these tools in a lesson plan, and then give you all a chance to play with it and do it yourself in breakout groups. So the lesson that we picked is from the Oregon Farm Bureau called Corn. It's Not All Ears, and Barb will put the link to it in the chat. It's probably an elementary school lesson. So for some of you, that teach upper grades, this might not be appropriate, but it was a pretty simple lesson and a good demonstration one. So the main activities in the lesson are here. The first one is students examine a corn plant, label the parts, draw the corn plant and their functions, and then they investigate corn products, so items that contain corn or corn byproducts, and then create a display with containers and products. And then students make popcorn in class, have a corn feast by eating only products made from corn. And the lesson also suggests that students create corn husk dolls like Native American and colonial period children did. So one more click, please, Susan. So I want to pause here just for a few moments and give you an opportunity to think about how would you embed SEL strategies and tools in this lesson plan. And I'll just give you some time for quiet reflection before I share with you how I would do it. And you will get a chance to share in your breakout groups. So if you want to just take a couple of moments for some quiet thinking time, that would be great, and you're invited to do so.
Yasmeen, I don't have the link. Do you want to put it in?
Oh, yeah.
Thank you.
All right, so I want to preface the next slide before we click by saying that there are many, many ways to implement SEL in a classroom. And as Susan already mentioned, all of you are already doing it. This is not some completely brand new concept. As educators, you're all doing it every single time you interact with students. So there's no right or wrong way really to do it, except for, of course, the equity lens that we already talked about. So next slide, please. So I wanted to share with you briefly some of the ways that I would do it before sending you off in your breakout groups for you to talk about how you would do it. So one more click, please. So for self-awareness, I would begin with an emotional check-in. So start the lesson with that. Maybe ask students, how do they feel about corn? Do they like corn? Why or why not? And then make sure to tease out any biases or prejudices. And then for self-management, I would add some mindfulness to it. So especially as the students are investigating the corn, prompt them to tune in with their sight, touch, smell, sound, taste. So using their senses for mindfulness. For social awareness, I would invite them that after they've investigated all the corn products and byproducts in our food, to again, invite them to imagine what it would be like if they were allergic to corn and couldn't eat any of this. So what would they not be able to eat? What would they miss? And this is kind of that exercise of practicing empathy for those people who might not be able to eat corn, putting yourself in someone else's shoes. One more click, please. So another one for social awareness and relationship skills is, in addition to drawing and labeling the corn parts and its functions, ask students to maybe write a thank you letter, either to the corn plant itself for all it does for us, or maybe the corn farmer for all they do to bring the corn to us, to our plate, to our dinner table, either in the form of the byproducts or the actual corn ear, whatever it might be. So this again practices gratitude, but also thinking through the social awareness piece of what all does it take for me to eat corn. And then I would invite the students to read their letters out loud to each other, which is that relationship building skill. And then for responsible decision making, I would, when it comes to the corn feast, the corn potluck meal that they're having, I would ask students to come up with a plan for how they want to organize this. I mean, there's a couple of things that need to happen. Who's signing up for which dish? What day do you want to do it on? Are there food allergies to consider? How do you let the parents know? So let them figure it out, and then you're there to support them. And then for social awareness, one more time, the lesson suggests creating the corn husk dolls. And I think this is a fantastic opportunity to tie this lesson to the SB 13 curriculum, the Oregon Shared History, Tribal History, Shared History, curriculum. Bring some of those lessons in, share with the students whose land they're on, who are the indigenous people living nearby, who's the tribe. This is just a great opportunity for that introduction to be made. And I can imagine for not all of the tribes in Oregon that corn husk dolls were used because corn doesn't grow everywhere. I'm assuming it doesn't grow on the coast. I could be wrong, but so I would swap this out for a more appropriate doll or toy material that the local tribe, wherever your school is, wherever your learners are, did use. All right, any questions about this? Anything you'd like to add to this? Or anything you'd like me to clarify before we send you off?
Do you want to show them the Google slide?
I do.
In?
Yeah, we're not yet. I just wanted to pause here for a
Okay.
moment in case anything I shared with you so far, if anyone has a question, but also completely fine if not. So Susan, next slide, please. So for you to put this into practice, we will send you off into breakout groups of 3 to 4. And I invite you to click on the link that I'm popping in the chat right now. Barb, I don't know if you had access to it, so I figured I'd just do it. It is a Google slide deck. And the very first slide in this Google slide deck is the invitation, how to participate in your breakout group. And it's also on this slide. And then after that, there's a slide for each of the groups. And the title of the slide is the group number. So when Barb sends you off into your breakout group, I urge you to pay attention to what your group number is, because that's the slide you'll navigate to. And once you're in the slide, at the very top is a lesson plan that is somewhat unique to your group. Click on the link, read through the lesson plan, and then in your group, discuss how you would embed SEL strategies and tools and take notes in your slide. This is a resource that everyone has access to, so we welcome you to read through everybody else's ideas after this workshop. You might use it as a tool for your own lessons, some ideas for your own lessons. So yeah, we want to invite you to take notes. Okay, so I encourage you again, click on the link in the chat, because once you're in your breakout groups, we can't add anything to the chat anymore that everyone can see. So navigate to the chat, click on the link, and then Barb will send you off to your breakout groups. Okay, well, welcome back. I hope it was a fruitful activity for you, a little bit of a discussion with other educators and thinking through the process of how you might embed SEL. So we have time for maybe 1 to 2 people to share any insights you had in your group, any other feedback really that you would like to share with everyone. So if there is 1 to 2 people who'd like to share, you're welcome to put it in your comment in the chat or unmute yourself and share.
Yasmeen, somebody's asking if you can reshare the document in this chat.
Yes, let me do that.
Thank you.
So again, that you don't have to share. I know it's the end of probably a long Monday, but if anyone has thoughts.
I was talking to myself here. I thought I had it unmuted. I was like, gee, so back to myself here. Now I'm sharing. In our group, we talked about the school garden, and it's a great place to conduct an experiment and dealing with water and gauges, water gauges. So self-awareness could be, how many of you know what a garden is, and does everybody have access to water, kind of thing? Because we take it for granted that, we have access to water. I just learned that here in Oregon, you can't have a rain barrel to collect water because that's illegal. I did not know that. I'm from Texas. Wow. In Texas, that's okay. But again, even in Texas. So we take it for granted that we have access to water, and that's not the case for everybody. Self-awareness, and then management of the rain gauge of, as the rain comes down, we have to ask these questions, self-management. So using this for a garden, based on the rain collected, the water, can you plant certain plants during a certain time of year because of lack of water? So that's a management that's going to allow them to decide, what do we need to do to move forward with this? And then social awareness of, does everybody have access to put a garden? And if we have a community garden, who gets to benefit? So when you put it in those terms, it allows kiddos to see self-awareness of, man, I have access to this. And if you do have it, do people that help with the garden, can they share, the fruits of their labor? So that's what we talked about.
Great. Thank you so much for sharing, Melinda. Yeah, and we will, as I already mentioned, we will send out the link to this Google Doc in an email afterwards. So feel free to continue adding to it. And again, browsing around and seeing what other groups came up with. So we're almost at the end of our time together. Next slide, please. And I would like to ask for a volunteer if you'd like to unmute yourself and read out our final quote out loud for us, please.
It is not what is poured into the student, but what is planted that counts. E.P. Burton.
Yeah, thank you so much, Catherine. Okay, next slide, please. So to close out, I would like to invite you to tune back into yourself and remember the farm animal that you identified with at the beginning, and just tune in and notice, did anything change? Is it the same farm animal now? Maybe the farm animal has grown up, or its fur or coat has changed. Maybe it's a completely new animal. So just giving you that moment of self-reflection, self-awareness. And if you'd like to share what your farm animal is now in the chat, please do so. And again, it could be the same animal, or something changed about that animal, or a completely new animal, or maybe you're no animal anymore. So we'll just give a few moments. And I'll share mine. I think I'm still a rooster, but I'm no longer crowing, kind of, getting ready to roost. And I see in the chat some people are adding it. So remain a sheep, same animal, an ox, a squirrel, always preparing. Still a working dog, same duck, but now is sitting on a nest of new ideas ready to hatch. Oh, I love that one. Thank you. They're all so great. Same animal, cat with curiosity. Horse, got to get running. Barn cat. Okay. Well, thank you so much. And as you continue doing this little self-awareness activity and adding to the chat, I will hand it back to Susan, who will share a little bit about next steps with you.
Thank you, Yasmeen. Thank you, Bob. And thank you everyone for engaging in thinking and reflecting a little about this. We're just tipping toes here on the water. I mean, 1 hour and a half is not enough time to really dive into it. So I wanted to make sure you know that this is just a first opportunity to think about it. So what's coming next for us are PDs about the actual content. Oh, don't go too far. there it is. If I touch anything, I'm trying to move the videos around and it touches the presentation and moves the slides. You get to get a sneak peek. Some things are coming up the pipeline. Our PD sessions down the line are going to focus on the 5 virtual experiences that we are creating. I'm happy to say that 4 of them are in rapid production now with our friends in Time Looper. It's on them now. All of the content was collected. All of the learning outcomes are done. All of our process is done thanks to a great team part of this Dive for Egg project. So it's being prototyped now, and we have a little sneak peek of what this may look like either on your VR glasses, kids, or in your app on your phone, on iPad. So basically, we took some creative signature to kind of not do the typical virtual experience, virtual field trip experience as you were walking into an actual place. Exactly as it is, we became a little bit more creative. This is, though, the Oak Creek Center at OSU. For those of us who know OSU and know some of those garden plots, the urban agriculture experiment sites, this is exactly what it is over here. It's an aerial view of it with some buildings around to illustrate that this is an urban garden in a way. So this is one example of the next PD, one of the PD sessions are coming down. This is the agroecology one. And as you see the little pins in there, as students or educators or anyone use the VR or they're using the iPhone and iPad to do these experiences, they actually walk into this virtual space, and each one of those pins is highlighting some of the content that are defined by our experts. Just for an example, you can see this one, you have even small spaces can be diverse, biodiversity is healthy, river hypothesis, oh, I like the type of that. It's like the hypothesis of the rivets on the plane. If they have to be together, what happened if all of the rivets in the wing of the plane are not together for species accumulation? Local farms bring biodiversity. I'm gonna advance that. So these are kind of the topics within the larger topics within those pins that you're gonna be introduced to content, right? In each one of the pin, we have this overarching topic that tells a story. And when you go in each one of those topics, you're gonna experience whether it's a 3D model, a hologram, a video, a youth explaining a recipe or doing something, all the content's gonna be there. In this particular one, we have the educator, the community kind of overarching topic, picking food with friends, and that kind of highlights, this is an actual oven that is in that site that we recorded, and we just magnified it to be large out of proportion, but there is a pizza oven that students can do, cook together and talk about the food that they learn about in the gardens, especially the global garden. Be inviting, there's a little airplane because of the rivet hypothesis in there, and the little animated bee that we created, it's voice narrated by one of our youth. One of the youth in our teens as teachers for Dive for Egg narrated all of this bee voice for us. She came up with that herself and it was fantastic. So we have a voiceover of one of our youth, and these are all content produced, directed, narrated, scripted by youth with the help of our educators, with the help of our experts. So you're going to walk in, and each one of those pins would dive into this message. They'll tell a full story. If you planted there, you come. That's how we ended. I'm thinking about small gardens and what you plant in global gardens. So what local farms bring biodiversity. Biodiversity is healthy. And this is a technical plan I'm not going to show. So when you do this experience, you're learning about this content created by the youth, with our experts at 4-H, and our experts in the team, they're curriculum builders, where they telling the story about this particular content. It's agroecology and biodiversity in the urban garden. What we're going to do moving forward, which one of those PDs, is that you're going to get a chance to hear from the experts and learn about the content in each one of those pins, so that you know the content that's being presented to the youth. And then we're going to build in and bring Barbie and Yasmeen back with some templates and platforms so that we can say, okay, if this is the content, how do we incorporate some of this STL embedded practices as you implement these with youth, as you do it yourself? And then we kind of have this feedback from you so that we can actually incorporate that into the lesson plans that we're creating to go along with the virtual experience. So we have 5 of those coming down the line, and we're kind of thinking about the structure is going to be like that. We're going to bring in the experts to talk about the content, and then think a little bit doing the same exercise you did today in a little more in-depth level. When you learn about this content, how do we embed this kind of practice, and hear from you about what would you do that we can incorporate in these lessons. And of course, we'll be sharing things with you in advance and something so you can have time to reflect and think. But this is just an sneak peek. It's not the final product. They're tweaking and making everything look more optimized and final and real. But these experiences are going to look like something like that. As you go into a extra. This is the 3 Mile Farm where we do the dairy filming. So the dairy experience is like learning from farm to table. So the pins will be there. You don't see the pins yet because they're working on it, but the pins will be there. And then you're going to be transported to the farm, or you're going to be transported to the cheese lab at OSU to learn about how they produce cheese, or they're going to be transported to something else. So they're going to look like this, have that feel. It's not necessarily a virtual field trip, but a virtual experience. And then the students are going to have a chance to come back and use some of the other time looper platforms to bring in more content if they wanted to, as part of lesson plans. I know in the last PD, we talked about this with you, and we had to push that 3rd session with time loop about that new product because it hasn't been approved by Apple yet. So we had to push it down the line and wait until it's approved to share that with you for some feedback. But I wanted to just give you a sneak peek. This is kind of the beginning, the entrance of these experiences are going to be for the youth. And they're going to walk into one of those pins and learn some content. And we want to make sure that we have worked together into building these LCL practices into the content with the help of Yasmeen and Barb, and put that in our lesson plans that are going to be shared with everyone when this is released. So if you have any more questions about that, I know the DIFRAG website has been put in there. I just want to share again, this is a USDA funded project. There's some of our partners. You're welcome to come to any one of our sections or become a DIFRAG educator if you want to. You can go to the DIFRAG website and learn how to do that, or contact me if you'd like. That means coming to all of the PD sessions and doing a couple more things for us, and you get a stipend to be a DIFRAG educator. For those of you who are already, thank you. For those of you who came in today to learn a little bit more about SCL, we appreciate you being here. I hope this was productive and interesting to you. That will bring you back to our next sessions where we're going to doing some more application of those embedded practices for our actual content. With that, I wanted to thank you. It's 6:06, we already passed. We always do the 6, be cognizant of your time, but I wanted to thank you. And I'll be here. Yasmeen said she'll be here a little bit. Bob will be here a little bit. If you want to stick around and ask a few more questions, we're more than happy to. Welcome. Thank you.
Thanks so much, everyone, for joining us. And for those of you taking off, have a great evening.